Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kadir Toktogulov. I'm Executive Director of Central Eurasia Leadership Alliance, CELA. As many of you know, I'd like to welcome all our guests, all our friends from the global network, and most of you are from SIBF. It's a pleasure to be joining you today. Today we have an important conversation discussion webinar that CELA put together with SIBF, Society of International Business Fellows, and I would like to thank our friends at SIBF staff for working with us on this. We have an important guest who will help us understand what's really going on in Ukraine, what's really going on between Ukraine and Russia. As many you already got a chance to read a little bit about our guest, Valery Chichelashvili, but I'll remind you of whom we have the honor of having as our guest on today's webinar. We also have Jim Krupe, whom I'll introduce a little later. Valery Chichelashvili, he's a former ambassador of the country of Georgia to Ukraine and the Russian Federation. Mr. Chichelashvili, Ambassador Chichelashvili, has been a senior fellow at the Georgia Foundation for Strategic and International Studies since 2016. Mr. Chichelashvili started his career as a diplomat in October 1989. That's right before the collapse of the Soviet Union. He held various positions in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Georgia, starting from second secretary to deputy foreign minister. That's 1998 to 2000. He was Minister of Finance in 2005 and first deputy foreign minister of Georgia from 2005 to 2007. He served as ambassador to Ukraine between 1994 to 1998, and ambassador of Georgia to Russian Federation, that's 2004 to 2005. Mr. Chichelashvili graduated from the Kiev State University, so he knows Kiev really well and Ukraine really well. Faculty of International Relations and International Law, Department of International Economic Relations, and he has a degree, a PhD in international economy. So his background clearly gives us a unique opportunity to hear directly from someone who worked and lived both in Ukraine and Russia. And today's webinar will be moderated by our dear friend of CELA and founder of the Society of International Business Fellows, Jim Krupe. Jim has known the region well through many engagements, including his engagements with CELA. We actually traveled together in 2008 when, right after Russian invasion of Georgia, to Georgia, together just a few weeks after the events to visit our friends and really see for ourselves the situation on the ground. So Jim is very well positioned to be a great moderator for this discussion. And thank you, Jim, for agreeing to be with us today and help us with today's discussion. But just to tell you a little bit, clearly the events that we've been witnessing for the past 2 weeks have had a great impact, not just on Eastern Europe, on Ukraine, but also on the region that CELA countries represent. CELA represents great impact on Central Asia, great impact on the Caucasus, and definitely the world that we're seeing now is new, something that we maybe thought we would never see again. But nevertheless, we're all trying our best to really understand what's going on. Jim, I'm turning it over to you. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this. I'm looking forward to today's this discussion. Also, a reminder that you could put in your questions. We'll have after about 30-minute this conversation with the ambassador and Jim. You'll have an opportunity to ask your questions. So there's a Q&A box, right, where which you'd use to write your questions, and I'll be reading your questions to Ambassador Chichelashvili after his brief discussion with Jim. Thank you, Jim. Over to you.
Thank you, Kadir. Well, let's jump right in, Valery, and we want to maximize our time with you. So why don't you go ahead and start and give us the overview from your perspective, some of the key points, and then you and I'll get into a little bit of Q&A, and then we'll turn it over to the audience.
Thank you very much, Jim, Kadir, Amy, all those who contributed to the organization of this session. I hope that it will be interesting for participants, and thank you again for this opportunity to give you some understanding of what's going on here in southeastern part of Europe. But I believe that it is important not only for this part of the world and not for the entire Europe, but for the world, because in the morning of 24th February, we found ourselves in completely different world. And I think that what's important now is to understand what kind of new quality problems and challenges we are faced. And we are faced everywhere, all over the world, because it's not European crisis, it's world crisis. As soon as all main global actors are involved in this or that way. First of all, of course, Russia, who is trying to invade Ukraine, and the United States, NATO, European Union, to some extent China. So it matters to everyone, and actually in front of us there is a new international order in making. So we may after this crisis, after this war will be over, we can find ourselves in a completely new environment, opening new perspectives and opportunities for everyone, including Russia, or we may return to the dark times where Europe was cooperation in Europe was based not on the international order and recognized norms and principles of international law, but on the division lines, New Berlin Wall, Iron Curtain, whatever. And I'm speaking on behalf of, not on behalf of government, of course. I'm now not part of government, but speaking on behalf of Georgian society. The last thing we want is to be at the wrong side of this curtain. If it will happen to to place itself in this part of the world. Now, of course, 24th is a critical date, 24th of February. But I think that in order to understand what really is going on, we have to go earlier and analyze what was the behavior of Russia, how it conceptualized its role and place in the network of international relations, and what were in reality goals of Russia, and what Russia wanted to reach, and what were the foreign policy top foreign policy priorities of Russia. And I think that Mr. Putin quite sincerely formulated this his main goal when he declared to State Duma, this is the parliament of Russia, that collapse of the Soviet Union was the main geopolitical tragedy of the 20th century. And from the very beginning, may I remind you that he's in power from 1999 as a prime minister, and then from 2000 as a president of this country. And so he has control over Russia for more than 22, up to 22 years right now. And he sees himself as the former president also, as a future president, excuse me. Also, the new constitution was adopted in Russia. So I think he has an intention to be president of Russia in 24th, as an outcome of 24th election of 2024, and then next election of 2031. So, what happened when it became clear actually how Mr. Putin is going to assert himself as a new type of Russian leader trying to compose former empire together. This actually started back in the year of 2008 when he invaded Georgia. And may I remind the audience that it was the first war on European continent in the 21st century. And Europe was a continent where the bloodiest wars took place in the 20th century, First and Second World Wars, and the 90s, the last decade of 20th century was again very bloody, with a lot of big and comparatively small, if we may speak about small conflicts in the very heart of Europe. But everybody hoped that 21st century will be different. And actually, we had a lot of preconditions for that. New charter for Europe, Paris Charter of 1990, Helsinki Final Act, OSCE important summit document of 1999. So actually, it seemed that we have all preconditions to avoid these new conflicts and wars in the 21st century, but it didn't happen like that. And in 2008, Russia attacked Georgia and annexed its two regions, Abkhazia and Tskhinvali regions, so-called South Ossetia. It was, I mean, then at that time I worked in Kiev as a Secretary General of Organization for Democracy and Economic Development, Guam. It's not an island in Pacific. It's Georgia, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, Moldova. And we Georgian diplomats then tried to explain to our Ukrainian friends, it was 2008, and to our European colleagues that this attempt to invade Georgia was not an exception in Russian foreign policy, but it was an extreme manifestation of common Russian policy vis-a-vis its neighbors. But it was not easy to convince our partners in that. And actually, itself, the rhetorics of Russian officials then, it was, I mean, the approach was very smart. I remember Mr. Lavrov speaking to State Duma in September 2008, when he openly declared that neighbors of Russia should not worry about Russia's policy because Russia will conduct its policy in full conformity with the internationally recognized principles and norms of international law, inviolability of borders, territorial integrity, so on. Georgia, he said, Georgia is a separate case because in Georgia, there is a Saakashvili type of leader, which we never see and nowhere see. Georgia should be punished, he said, because Georgia pursued a policy of genocide in South Ossetia, and he repeated all these stories about Georgian tanks chasing pregnant Ossetian ladies in the streets of sleeping Tskhinvali, and so on and so forth, which then was, all international experts then brought a lot of evidence saying that it was complete propaganda. But then it worked, and a lot of people in Ukraine, including Ukraine and Europe and the United States, a lot of politicians and a lot of experts breathed with relief, thinking that okay, it happened with Georgia, but Saakashvili himself was very emotional in his decisions, and maybe he was also somehow wrong. In 3 months after 2008 August invasion of Russia, this it was business as usual with the Russian Federation. Russia was not even expelled from G8 group. It continued to work with other 7 partners, and then Obama administration started a new reset policy with the Russian Federation. So it was business as usual until 2013, 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea and unleashed a second war in the eastern in Europe, in eastern part of Ukraine, in Donetsk and Lugansk regions. And then I also then was in Ukraine, and my Ukrainian friends told me that now they understand what I had in mind, saying that it's not an exception, but it's an extreme manifestation of common Russian policy towards its neighbors. And now this extreme manifestation from 2004, we observe vis-a-vis Ukraine. And at the moment, we have a full-fledged invasion and war. This is actually the result of the policy which we observed in anticipation of these tragic events. But at the moment, I understand that we don't have a lot of time, so I'll try to give some, as I understand, key points in this. And I want to bring your attention to the period in anticipation of what had happened on 24th of February, because we observed the very active diplomatic maneuvering from both Russian Federation and the collective West, as we see, mainly United States and NATO. But may I see that it was diplomacy only from West, from collective so-called West, because the policy and diplomacy of West was exactly an attempt to keep international order based on internationally recognized principles and norms of international law, UN Charter, Helsinki Final Act, and all other respective documents. But Russia tried to, it was not diplomacy, because as we all know, diplomacy is an ability to find a compromise, because two opponents or partners, they have different positions, and diplomats are trying to bring these positions together to find a compromise and then sign a respective agreement or whatever, acquire some responsibilities and rights, and then act in conformity with what has been signed. Okay, but what was Russia's position? Russia said very openly, it was actually ultimatum, saying that NATO should go to the line of 1997, that Ukraine, that this Bucharest famous formula about Ukraine and Georgia should be abolished, Ukraine should become a neutral state as well as Georgia. So actually, this ultimatum of Russia did not leave the space for diplomacy. On the opposite, what actually the United States and NATO offered Russia, it was exactly about the security guarantees to Russia. And may I remind you, and actually this was never published, this answer of the United States and NATO to Russia. And I remember when Mr. Sarkozy visited Russia, then during press conference with President of France, Mr. Putin said that, why you are afraid to publish your answer? Let it be open, transparent, because we don't have anything to hide. But in reality, this is all about diplomacy, because if you are openly declaring your position and making these red lines, then there is no space for compromise. But in Western position, in the position of the United States, there were a number of very important points giving guarantees for Russia's security, like the obligation not to deploy offensive weapons and military personnel of NATO in Ukraine, the obligation to remove Tomahawks systems from Poland and from Romania, the offering new negotiations with Russia on small and medium range missiles, a new round of negotiations on the strategic nuclear offensive weapons, new consultations on the indivisibility of security in OSCE area for Russia and issuing guarantees. So if the negotiations on the deployment of NATO forces in the entire Europe, in the end, of course, from Russia, it would be European part of Russia and so on. I mean that there were a lot of offered a lot of interesting track for negotiations to Russia. And if in reality, as Russia declared that Russia didn't have any intention to attack Ukraine and to invade and so on, it wouldn't matter for Russia whether Ukraine is in NATO or not, because there would be no offensive weapons in Ukraine, no military personnel in Ukraine. And if Russia would have no intention to attack Ukraine, then it would be all, I mean, clear, and all security guarantees will be in place. But the problem was that in reality, position of Russia was not about the security system in Europe. It was about New Yalta dividing lines, saying that I want certain spheres of influence. And first of all, this is a space of former Soviet Union. And of course, this didn't work, because membership of NATO, I mean, it's not a question of NATO expansion, because actually Georgia as well as Ukraine, we have different options at the table. We may apply for NATO membership, what we did, and we also may apply for CSTO membership, Collective Security Treaty Organization, which is a military political bloc organized and led by Russia. But the question is why we want to be members of NATO and not members of CSTO. And the main problem here is that Russia is the center of power. Of course, it's a big state with enormous resources, with nuclear weapons, United Nations Security Council permanent member. And of course, by definition, Russia always will be a center of power. But the problem is, but Russia could not demonstrate the ability to be a center also of attraction. And I mean, if you take the latest developments of latest 20 years in Russia, you will see that actually it's very reminding a communist rule style. The same person, 22 years, you know, the leader of the country, and Russia is inhabited with a very gifted and talented people. There are a lot of very bright minds and very, you know, talented people in Russia. How come that one person pretends to lead this nation for 22 years, and then with an ambition to prolong for another 14 years his stay at the top of the power? And we see that actually Russia is a country where all political opponents are either assassinated, as Mr. Boris Nemtsov, who was one of the leaders of Russian opposition, or are imprisoned, like Mr. Alexei Navalny, who actually did excellent job, you know, working on the corruption investigations in the top elite of Russia. And all, I think states should be very grateful for Mr. Navalny for his investigations, as in normal state it would have help state to, you know, to fight with corruption and improve the state of management of the country and so on. But Mr. Navalny is in prison. Plus, I mean, he was imprisoned after he gave a smoking gun to authorities when he spoke with a person who was trying to assassinate himself, person of agent of Federal Service of Security, you know, who himself confessed in telephone conversation with Mr. Navalny that yes, he was trying to assassinate him. And now Mr. Navalny is in prison. He is sentenced to years and years of isolation, imprisonment, so that he cannot take part in the political life of Moscow. Other people, like also very talented and gifted personalities, like Mr. For example, Guriev, famous economist, Mr. Kasparov, or Mr. Khodorkovsky, they are in exile. You know, they can stay in. Now ask me, why should Georgia or any other state trying to build up its own statehoodness and democracy? Of course, I mean, we are just learning, we have to improve and we have to learn a lot, but we are trying to become better. And for us, of course, the space of European Union and Euro Atlantic space, NATO space, is much more attractive. Why? Because there are standards of rights, you know, there are standards of their business opportunities, standards of education, security, stability, completely qualitatively different norms and standards and criteria of cooperation, is much more attractive, you know, because if you will ask anyone, for example, in the streets of Moscow or St. Petersburg, even youngsters, that would they prefer to study in Sorbonne or in Oxford, or go to Moscow and St. Petersburg's university, even 9 out of 10 youngsters, I'm sure, will tell you that they prefer Sorbonne or Oxford. And I mean, the same is with with Georgia? Why should we try to, I mean, to join this space which is led by Russian Federation? So the question is not expansion of NATO, but choice of every state to organize its own security guarantees, and at the end of the day, to introduce better security, better welfare in the country, and better prospects of development, prospects for development. And unfortunately, we don't see any of those in the Russian Federation. Plus, may I say that at the very beginning, after collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia had all the benefits in this part of the world. Russian language, I mean, the model of behavior, better understanding of markets, of history, and so on. At least Georgia, for example, was last 200 years either in Russian Empire or in the Soviet Union. So we were very close together. It was very easy for Russian Federation, in case Russia would transform itself into a center of attractiveness, to keep all these former Soviet Union republics in some kind of multilateral agreement, forming the space where Russia would be by definition and main actor. And I mean, a lot of us, we are just watching, I mean, and waiting what Russia would propose. Now, when we speak about, if I would like to give you one example from my own diplomatic practice. In 1994, in February, President Yeltsin visited Georgia. It was after Abkhaz War was over, and he arrived to Georgia. We signed a framework agreement on friendship, cooperation, good neighborhood, and so on and so forth. And President Yeltsin said openly that Russia should take its own part of responsibility of what had happened in Abkhazia. And we were, I mean, so excited about this. We were thinking maybe new stage of our relationship with Russia will start now, and we will find some better modalities of cooperation, better understanding, and so on. And then Russia proposed us to sign the agreement on the deployment of Russian military bases in Georgia. In 1994, we had in Georgia 3 military bases, one in Tbilisi, another in Akhalkalaki, which is in eastern part of Georgia, and in Batumi, in the western part of Georgia. And we were speaking with Russian. We were asking them to withdraw these military bases from our territory. But in 1994, it was decided that maybe we should try to do something to find some new platform of cooperation with Russia. And we signed this agreement. For 25 years, Georgia signed an agreement giving a right for Russia to have its military bases in Georgia for another 25 years till 2019. But we had 2 preconditions. First, and with these preconditions, we were ready to go to Parliament and ratify this military accord. First was our precondition was for Russia to assist us in restoring our territorial integrity. And second was for Russia, we asked Russia to help us to build up our army, to personnel, equipment, and so on. And I think that in this second component, Russia even was more interested than we. It never happened, so it was never ratified. And then, you know, we started to seeing other opportunities because it didn't work with Russia. Now, if Russia wanted to secure, for example, Georgia outside NATO and sees as the military ally of Russia, it would be very, very easy for them to do because we signed this agreement. You know, it was there, but it didn't happen. Now, what in reality, if we take this whole complexity and complex of international relations, what happened due to Russia's policies? We all found ourselves in the middle of a crisis of trust in international relations, because you know, when you sign an agreement, when you find a compromise and then ratify treaty or agreement, and then you are supposed to accordingly to behave yourself in the network of international relations. But again and again, Russia demonstrated that it didn't care about documents Russia is signing, you know. And I can name you dozens of documents vis-a-vis Georgia, Ukraine, other countries, which were violated by Russia. And if we take Ukraine, for example, it is Budapest Memorandum of December 5, 1994, which was signed by President Yeltsin, giving all guarantees to Ukraine with the sovereignty, non-interference, internationally recognized borders and territorial integrity, and all those. And then in 1997, 31st of May, the framework agreement was signed between Russia and Ukraine on partnership, cooperation, big framework agreement with all these Helsinki Act principles enshrined in it. And it was ratified then by Russian Federation. And then it was also registered in the United Nations. But then we observed what had happened in 2013-14, and then now we face this invasion, full-fledged invasion of Russian Federation in Ukraine. Okay, now.
Valery,
Yes.
let me interrupt you and so that we have time for Q&A with the group.
If you will give me just 2 minutes, Jim.
Okay.
Okay, just 2 minutes. Okay, because what I want to say is that at the moment, I mean, Russia is in a very different position because Russia had its natural advantage as an authoritarian state, because Mr. Putin could make very quick decisions and then implement them very resolutely. And this is advantage of authoritarian state. Democracy isn't working like that, because democracies, they have to consult about decisions, both internally in country and then internationally, in this case in NATO. And everybody had very clear opinion what's going to happen. Number one. Number two, Russia lost the information war, and everybody now knows what Russia is and what type of country that is, and what kind of policy Russia pursues in international relations. And number three, if Russia wanted to test the unity of collective West, now we see that this unity is much more stronger, and it's becoming stronger day by day. And this is also something new. I don't think Russia was waiting for that. Plus sanctions, okay, which are more and more strong. And I have strong doubts about the capacity of Russian economy surviving these sanctions. Although I think, and it will be my final at a sort of conclusion, I think that as we see ourselves now in a completely different world, we are applying all categories like sanctions, severe sanctions, health sanctions. I think that at the moment we have to think about the complete economic, financial, and trade isolation of Russia, leading to its political and diplomatic isolation. And I think with this sustainable isolation policy, we will bring better perspectives, not only for Ukraine and Europe, but for Russia itself. Thank you, Jim. And here I will finish, and I'm ready to take questions.
Okay, I think I'll ask you one question so that we have plenty of time for everybody else. Because as I understand it, there's a saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast every day. And I think you've kind of reinforced that with your comments here. My question would be, before we turn it over to everybody else, is if you were the senior advisor to the President of the United States in the West, what would you advise them to do that they're not now doing?
At the moment, my advice will be to consolidate further the unity of collective West, to introduce more sanctions leading to complete isolation of Russia, to provide more humanitarian, financial, and economic aid to Ukraine, as Ukraine now is fighting not only for its freedom and sovereignty, but for the freedom and sovereignty of the whole Europe. And very concrete advice will be introducing non-fly zone over Ukraine, if not completely over the whole territory of Ukraine. Then in some critical areas, Jim, like the space over, nuclear stations of Ukraine, and maybe space adjacent to the NATO space, say Polish-Ukrainian border, Romanian-Ukrainian border, taking 100 kilometers inside Ukraine. So, but I think that this non-fly zone is critical, because if we want to stay this war in Ukraine and not go beyond existing internationally recognized Ukrainian borders, we should all together win in Ukraine. Otherwise, we will face much more tragic developments.
Yeah, I think your comment about this isn't just the fight for freedom of the Ukrainians, but it's a fight for freedom around the world, not just in Europe, but with the United States and its other allies across the world. At this point, I'll turn it over to Kadir. You want to take the questions we've got in our remaining time?
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Ambassador. We have a question which I think you answered sort of earlier, but still I'd like to pose it to you. Do you think the U.S. should intervene militarily in a direct way?
Excuse me, I'm not
Do you
sure.
think the United States should intervene militarily in a direct way?
Intervene. I think that at the moment, Kadir, there is no necessity to intervene militarily on the ground. But providing these air defense systems and introducing non-fly zone will be quite enough, and the rest Ukrainians will do themselves. And may I remind you that the whole world is now supporting Ukraine, and a lot of volunteers. It's thousands and thousands of people there. And these are people who are, very experienced warriors. And these people are coming not only from Georgia or from the post-Soviet space, but also from the United States, from Great Britain. So for the time being, I think that there is no necessity. for the United States to participate in land operations, but non-fly zone is critical.
Thank you. Next question. Thank you for your comment. How would you describe the alliance between Russia and China, and what is the risk of this alliance for the international community?
Well, I think that Russia, Russia miscalculated the degree of assistance she was expecting from China. China is observing this situation, and there are some very, signals which should be taken very seriously by Russia. For example, on a number of occasions, Minister of Foreign Affairs of China openly said that territorial integrity of Ukraine is not something we should discuss on. Number of banks from China, they refuse to cooperate with Russian banks under sanctions, and it's quite understandable because China has billions of trade with Russia, but trillions of trade with the United States and Europe. And Russia is much more dependent on the European and US markets than on Russia. For example, latest example is that China refused to provide spare parts for Russian airplanes, which is very critical because under the existing embargo, I think that in 2-3 months, there will be no available plane in Russia. I'm not speaking about the closing of skies for Russia military, for Russia civil planes, but in Russia itself, it will be very difficult to organize flights because of embargo. So I think that China is observing the situation, and in any case, China will benefit because Russia will definitely be whatever end will be to this invasion. In any case, Russia will be considerably weakened, and weak Russia is in interest of China because China has its own interests in the Far East and in the eastern part of Russia. So I think that well, actually, Mr. Putin miscalculated a lot of things he was warned about, including his own top military experts. But one of things he miscalculated is support of China.
Thank you. Next question. Don't we need to give Putin some face-saving off-ramp in order for this not to escalate to a European-wide war? Wouldn't the no-fly zone effectively engage NATO in active war?
Well, actually, of course, we have to give him this face-saving solution. And earlier, Mr. Putin will understand that he has to retreat. I think that he will have better options to face his safe. Because nobody is interested in the global conflict and so on and so forth. And when speaking about that so-called escalation and so on, tell me, what is the difference between air defense systems and provide massive delivery of Stinger systems and Javelin systems and NLAW systems and volunteers going to Ukraine? What is difference between these actions and providing, for example, military airplanes? Actually, we are already in war. Ukraine is in active phase of war, and then the rest of us, NATO and Georgia, including Georgia, we are also part of this conflict, although at the moment in passive way. But another point, another side of the coin, Kadir, is that when you are demonstrating to Putin the resolution, the unity and decisiveness in your actions, I mean, then of course you are his space of maneuvering is shrinking. But when Mr. Putin sees that the European Union or NATO countries are not united, that there are differences in the positions, then he has all, preconditions to think that, okay, in this case, I can engage my own instruments and methodology, bribing this and bribing that, offering something, some special attitude to some European countries. We know that there is no full unity. That's why I think that now it's time to speak not about sanctions, but about the complete isolation, because everybody now understands that Mr. Putin and his policy poses the main threat to the international order. And actually, we already saw the signs of political and diplomatic isolation. Remember the United Nations resolution, recent resolution on Russian invasion to Ukraine. So only 4 countries supported Russia. These are Belarus, understand, Syria, Eritrea,
Venezuela. Yeah.
No, Venezuela refrained. Number 4 was Belarus.
Ambassador, so yeah.
Okay, so
there's next question that would follow up what you just
good.
said. Assuming that Russia succeeds in overrunning Ukraine, what is the likelihood of Putin invading a NATO country such as Poland?
Well, in order to make this projection, we have to see what Russia did in the previous years. Okay, when Russia feels the weakness, Russia doesn't pay any respect to principles and norms of international law, whatever, being it by bilateral obligations or in multilateral format obligations. I mean, UN Charter, Helsinki Act, document of 1999 summit, OSCE Istanbul summit, and so on. So then I am absolutely sure that if Russia will take control over Ukraine, the whole control, then it will take a period, okay, a certain period in order to calm all this down. Russia will adopt itself to sanctions, will try to remove these sanctions to this or that extent. But next, I believe, will be not Poland, but the part of the former Soviet Union, which are Baltic states. Maybe
Not
Poland.
even Belarus.
Maybe Belarus is already under full Russian control, actually. But maybe Baltic states, maybe Georgia, maybe Moldova, maybe not even NATO space still. But I think that it will, Mr. Putin will make his next step. Well, although it will depend on also, I mean, we are speaking about this option when Russia takes control over the whole Ukraine, which I think at the moment is very unlikely, because, Russians were thinking that, the population of Ukraine, at least in the south and east, will meet them with flowers and there'll be no problem with occupying the whole southern part of Russia, and so till Transnistria, cutting off Ukraine from the Black Sea. But we see Russians speaking Kharkov, Russians speaking Nikolaev. What type of resistance is there? So I think that at the moment, Ukraine has an initiative. The one component where Ukraine is comparatively weaker than Russia is the sky. That's why no-fly zone.
So there's a question that would follow up what you're just saying is, what is the best result for Ukraine in this situation? Should they cede some territory to Russia to end the conflict?
Well, I think that the best option for Ukraine, of course, is to restore its territorial integrity. So it's best option not only to Ukraine, not only to Georgia or the Europe, or the whole international community, because with this we will demonstrate that international community has strengths and capacity to keep the international order based on recognized principles and norms of international law. And this will be good, Kadir, also for Russia itself, because it will give another chance for Russia to transform itself and to return to the international network of international relations based on this international recognized law and become a normal state, and to keep its own territorial integrity and borders. So I believe that maybe it sounds a little bit strange, but victory of Ukraine and restoring its territorial integrity will also contribute to better perspectives of Russia itself, not speaking about the rest of this space around it.
Ambassador, and last question, do you think, well, with the fast, complete collapse of Russian economy or expected collapse of Russian economy, what are odds of internal revolt?
Look, Kadir, they are very worrying signs. I don't know what they are thinking about all this, because may I say that during more than 1 week now, Moscow Stock Exchange is not working. They don't dare to open it, and ruble is not traded internally. So actually, at the moment, nobody knows what is the state of Russian economy. But in London Stock Exchange, the main Russian companies like Gazprom, Sevstal, Sberbank, Rosneft, they lost up to $650 billion. No, it's a complete collapse. Now, the capitalization of Gazprom declined by 98%. The same happened with Sberbank. So now we can project it to the Moscow Stock Exchange, and we at the moment we are just speculating what is the state of Russian economy. But the fact that they are not opening the trade sessions, this also contributes to the negative expectations of Russian people and Russian people. Now the Russian society has two main problems from the economic point of view. Number one, withdraw rubles from the banks, and number two, to convert these rubles into dollars. And now, actually, we all have contacts. You know, the black market is starting to work in Russia, and ruble is traded there somewhere between 250 and 300 rubles per dollar. This is disaster. But even today, it was postponed yesterday for today. Today it was not. This trade session didn't take place. Now they're speaking about Monday, but I see that they are. I mean, it's a big fear in Russia, and there are certain rumors that Minister of Finance and Governor of Central Bank, Madame Elvira Nabiullina, they tried to resign, to step down, but Putin didn't allow them to do so. Well, I think that this is very, very important component. I think that, well, actually the war is the capacity, the financial capacity, the economic capacity. And I mean, this state of affairs, these are very worrying signs. Plus, you know, the assets of the central bank of Russia, you know, more than $6 billion were seized. So I think that this will have, I mean, tremendous effect on Russian economy, and these well-concerted actions, sanctions against Russia will inevitably also contribute to victory of Ukraine and retreat of Russia in future, I believe.
Ambassador Chechilashvili, I would like to thank you for your participation, for joining us. And I'd like to, at this point, turn it over back to Jim for closing remarks. But this was definitely very, very helpful to understand and get your perspective, Ambassador, from Georgia, a country that's very close to Ukraine, but also went through similar events in 2008. Jim, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Kadir.
Kadir. I'd like to thank Kadir, and Valeria, I'd like to thank you for your insights, maybe even more than that, your passion. One of the nice things about having these kinds of things is that you get to feel the pulse of somebody that's been there, been in the middle of it, knows both sides of the equation, and that's something not easily gained by regular media. So thank you very much. To me, one of the most interesting things that you said was this almost counterintuitive notion that maintaining territorial integrity, the Ukraine actually could benefit the Russians in the long term for their own territorial integrities, whether that matters to them in their interest in expanding their spheres of influence and all that, I guess will be the key to this. But thank you so much for taking your time. I know we probably could have gone on another hour, but we want to wish you the best in all you're doing, and thank you for sharing your insights.
Thank you, Jim, very much. It was very interesting to me, and thank you for this opportunity again. It was pleasure and honor.
Take care. I'm looking forward to seeing you face to face.
Come to Tbilisi.
Okay. And Kadir, thank you again. And thanks to SIBF and the entire staff. And we wish all of you a wonderful day today and in whatever you're doing with your life and your business. Take care.
Thank you.